What lies behind and beyond our fascination with rock stars and other high achievers? Today we go beyond with the multidimensional explorer Howard Bloom. He was the music publicist for stars like Michael Jackson, Prince, Billy Joel, Bob Marley and many more. He's been called next in a line of seminal thinkers that include Newton, Darwin, Einstein, Freud and Buckminster Fuller by Britain's Channel 4 TV, and the next Stephen Hawking by Gear magazine. Author of 7 books, Bloom's career and explorations combine cosmology, theoretical physics, microbiology, business, popular culture and much more. Let's go truly beyond with Howard Bloom.
Go beyond your horizons.
Howard Bloom, thank you so much for connecting to the spacecraft today.
Javier, it's a pleasure, especially after all these years.
Exactly, after all these years to finally meet like this is an honor and it's a great pleasure, Howard. Thank you so much. All right, so it's really such a pleasure to have Howard with us today. Because of his incredible, unique career and life in every single way. And he's just published an amazing book that is titled Einstein, Michael Jackson and Me, A Search for Soul in the Power Pits of Rock and Roll. An incredible book. And I'm so excited because we are going to go now through a number of topics through this incredible book that also connect with the very universal themes that I'm very interested in. And I want to begin, Howard, with one that is very special to me, that is mastery. You know, because through your incredible book and all the interviews that you do, you talk about Michael Jackson and his incredible drive to take every detail to perfection and to look at things as if it is the first time that you do them or you see them with absolute commitment, absolute energy. And you say that comparing with other rock and roll stars, he went beyond in this. And then you talk about these incredible 2 laws of science, the law of courage and the law of awe, wonder, curiosity, and surprise. Could you tell us a bit about these 2 laws of science, why Michael was an incredible representation of these laws, and about this mastery, this absolutely unique commitment? Because, people are used to see the final product, the artist on stage, but they don't see this invisible work and commitment behind. Could you tell us a bit about this through Michael?
Well, let's start with the first two laws of science. So
yes.
When I was a child, my father was drafted for the Second World War when I was born.
Wow.
Even though he was lessons and was 33 years old and had a new child. So he was shipped from Buffalo, my hometown, to San Francisco. So I didn't have a father for the first 3 years of my life. And I just started a little liquor store. And my mother had to take over the little liquor store. And that involved working from 9 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock at night.
Wow.
So I didn't have a mother when I was a baby, and my mother did something really stupid. She should have hired a babysitter, because the job of a babysitter is to take care of the baby, right? No, she hired cleaning, and the job of cleaning women is to take care of the vacuum cleaner and the rug. So I was in a little windowless corridor with one of those folding wooden baby gates, and the floor never turned on the light, and the floor was cold. I could feel it because I was crawling in those days. And it was a terrible way to begin your childhood. Yeah. And then when she finally let me meet other kids, there was a polio at the time. So my mother was hesitant about letting me spend any time with other kids. The other kids had only one use for me: to chase me around the block, to beat me up, to humiliate me. I was a target. Not a member of the
bullying.
I was basically a lost kid. And when I was 10 years old, a book appeared in my lap in my parents' living room. And it was a book I'd never seen before. And I don't know what it was, to tell you the truth. And it said the first two laws of science are these: the truth at any price, including the price of your life. And it gave the example of Galileo. And it said that Galileo was willing to go to the stake in order to defend his truth, which was not right. But it would take me 30 years to realize that wasn't correct. But I needed that story. So the first law, as you just said, is the law of courage. The second law of science, according to this book, was that look at things right under your nose as if you've never seen them before, and then proceed from there. Look for things that are invisible to you and invisible to everyone around you, things you take for granted. Bring them into visibility and look at them as I've never seen them before. And so the second law of science was the law, as you said, of awe, wonder, and surprise. And so I became converted. I converted to science as a religion at the age of 10. And science has been a religion ever since, based on those two laws. Now, the first time I met Michael Jackson, I was at his brother Marlon Jackson's pool house. A pool house is a little building next to the swimming pool, and it was only big enough for one room on each floor. It had 2 floors. And so the brothers treated me like another brother.
Wow.
So the brothers and I were huddled around the pool table in the middle of the room. The walls, by the way, were lined with arcade video games, much too expensive for normal humans to ever afford. So that was astonishing. And the pool table was heaped with merchandise because we were making decisions about merchandising. And the brothers put me right in the middle. You know, I was flanked by brothers on each side. And I was explaining to them that you try to do the most astonishing tours you possibly can, so that any T-shirt you sell has to be the most astonishing T-shirt that anyone has ever seen. And as I was in the middle of this speech about their merchandising, the screen door opened, and I knew Michael was supposed to be coming for a meeting with the art director from CBS. So, and because I didn't grow up among other kids, I didn't know normal human rituals. For example, I didn't know what "let's go have a cup of coffee" means. I didn't know what "let's go have a drink" means. In fact, I didn't learn what "let's have a drink" means until 10 years ago, very late in my life. But I had been taught at the age of 19 by another kid my age that if there's somebody walking into the room that other people want you to meet, you walk over to him, you put out your hand, and you say, "Hi, I'm Howard." And the other person will put out his hand and say, "Hi, I'm so-and-so." So I heard the screen door open, and it had to be Michael. And I walked over to the screen. And while he was still walking through the door, I put out my hand, and I said, "Hi, I'm Howard." Now, I had read 1,000 articles that said Michael Jackson, literally 1,000 articles, that said Michael Jackson was a bubble baby. And if you put your hand out to him, he would shrink away from your touch. So I was expecting him to shrink. I didn't really think he would shrink away. I didn't feel those things were legitimate. One way or the other, I put out my hand and I said, "Hi, I'm Howard." He put out his hand and he said, "Hi, I'm Michael." And that was it. It was a perfectly normal handshake. And I told him we had a press release, that I had a press release that I needed his approval of. Now, it took enormous courage to tell Michael Jackson that I needed his approval on a press release. All of my own materials. I wrote my biographies. I wrote my press releases because I was trying to get across a vision of what my artist really was, and I couldn't entrust that to a writer. You know, it was just the guy I hired. So Michael said, "Let's go upstairs." We walked up the stairs to the second floor. The second floor room turned out to be heaped floor to ceiling with amplifiers and keyboards. So Michael found a spot on one amplifier, and I found a spot on another amplifier. And I started to read this press release to Michael. Now, a little bit of background. When I was 12 years old, I was reading a book on relativity by Albert Einstein, and it wasn't the book on relativity that grabbed me. It was the introduction. And it felt like Albert Einstein had reached out through the pages of that book, had grabbed me by the lapels, and put his nose up to mine and said, "Schmuck, listen up." I was 12. "If you want to be a genius, it is not enough to come up with a theory only 7 men in the world can understand. To be a genius, you have to be able to come up with that theory, and then you have to be able to explain it so clearly that anyone with a high school degree and a reasonable degree of intelligence can understand it." So Albert Einstein had personally told me, "Your job is to be a writer. If you want to be an original scientific thinker, you must be a writer." And at the same time, I was reading George Gamow's 1, 2, 3 Infinity. George Gamow is the guy who created the idea, or was the major champion of the idea of the Big Bang, which was extremely controversial in the early 1950s when I was reading this. And George Gamow wrote like a dream. He wrote in a way that made every paragraph just another candy in an assorted candy tray, that made every page another pastry on a pastry card. It was amazing. So I was getting the mandate, not just to be a writer who could write clearly, but to be a writer who could write deliciously, who could seduce you, who could make sure that once you started reading, you couldn't resist, that you just kept turning the pages. And then when I was in college, I was kidnapped. The poet in residence thought that I would be the next great writer to come out of NYU. Specifically, he thought I'd be the next great poet to come out of NYU. And one day he said, look, Bloom, when everybody leaves the class, I want you to stay and close the door. So I waited till everybody was gone. I closed the door. I sat down in the seat where you know you're going to be bawled out, Javier. You just know it.
Yeah.
And he said, look, you turd. Last year, I asked you to be on the staff of the literary magazine. You never even showed up. This year, I'm telling you, you are the editor of the literary magazine. Let's put that differently. You are the literary magazine. You don't even have a faculty advisor. You are the literary magazine the minute you walk out that door. Now get the hell out of that door. So I walked out of that door looking very confused. And somebody said, you look confused. Can I help you with something? And I said, yes. And he said, well, let's go have a cup of coffee. I said, I've just been named the editor of the literary magazine. I hated literary magazines. And he said, let's go for a cup of coffee. Well, Javier, of course, I knew nothing about what having a cup of coffee was all about. So I meekly followed him down 2 flights of stairs to a cafe just down the street. And he ordered a cup of coffee, and I ordered a glass of water. And he asked me one of the most important questions of my life. If you could do anything you wanted to do with this magazine, what would it be? And I said, it would be a picture book. So he said, okay, you've got your answer. So I turned it into an experimental graphics and literary magazine. And we won 2 National Academy of Poets prizes. And we also created a major stir in the art community in New York City. I got phone calls from the editor at Look magazine, which was this great big full-color glossy weekly magazine, and Evergreen Review, which was the leading avant-garde magazine in the world at the time, and Boy's Life, which was the magazine of the Boy Scouts of America. Ironically, I'd been thrown out of the Boy Scouts for incompetence in Morse code when I was 11. I'm the only kid I've ever heard of who's been thrown out of the Boy Scouts. The point is, I took my writing very seriously.
Yeah.
So seriously, I was able to edit a magazine that won 2 National Academy of Poets prizes. And now, here I was with Michael Jackson, and I started reading the press release to him. And as I said, he went, oh. And when he said, did you write that? I said, yes, I did. But remember, I wrote that with all this background of all these years, trying to be an extraordinary writer, and with my background in poetry as well. And Michael said, that's beautiful. Michael was the only person who had ever seen all the effort in a press release. It was astonishing, Javier. And then we went downstairs because we had an appointment with the art director from CBS. And the art director from CBS came over with 5 of the most magnificent portfolios you've ever seen in your life. Most artists' portfolios are black vinyl. These portfolios were hand-tooled cherry wood and hand-tooled leather. And she slid the first portfolio across to us. Now, Michael was standing on my immediate right. So I could feel his right elbow up against my right elbow. I could feel his left knee up against my right knee. And the brothers were flanking us on either side, pressing us together. And this portfolio was slid across the green billiard table toward us. And Michael began to open up the first page. And when he saw just a square inch of the picture, he went, oh, and his knees began to buckle. And that was conveyed to me in body language and muscular language, because his knee was up against my knee. And he opened it another 2 inches. And he went, oh. And he opened it 3 inches. And he went, oh, and his knees continued to buckle. And finally, when he got the whole picture, oh. So Michael Jackson, here I'd been in search of awe, wonder, and surprise since I was 10 years old. It was the second law of science. Look at things right under your nose if you've never seen them before, and then proceed from there. The law of awe, wonder, and surprise and curiosity. Here was Michael Jackson having an aesthetic orgasm. Here was awe, wonder, and surprise than I had ever anticipated seeing in my life. I was astonished. I was absolutely astonished in ways I can't even convey to you with words. It went to the very depth of my being.
Wow.
I mean, William Blake has a poem about seeing a world in a grain of sand and infinity in an hour. Michael Jackson was seeing the infinite in the tiniest of things. It was a revelation.
Beautiful.
Then I met with Michael, or one of the next times I met with Michael. I was back in my office in New York City, and I kept a little red $19.95 nylon knapsack that I'd gotten at a bargain store behind my desk. And it contained a razor, a toothbrush, a spare shirt, and a TRS 100, or Radio Shack laptop computer, the very first laptop computer ever made. It was there because I would get calls for emergencies. So at 4 o'clock one day, sure enough, I got a call for an emergency. And the emergency was, Michael is canceling his tour. You're the only one he will listen to. You have to be out here in LA by 11 o'clock tonight.
Wow.
So I took my little red knapsack and I told my receptionist to get me a flight to LA and to get me a car. And I ran down and got the car, and the car drove me out to the airport. And I arrived in LA that night and went to the address that I was told to go to with my rental car. And it turned out that the address I was given was a studio lot. And it was filled with studio buildings. Studio buildings are like aircraft hangars. They're huge with these arched ceilings. They're enormous, absolutely enormous. The only one was lit. All the others were dark.
Wow.
But the building was so huge that it swallowed the light, that the light barely existed, that you could see the darkness surrounding the light. I walked in, and there were the Jacksons performing or rehearsing on a 110-foot stage. Now, look, a few years earlier, I had gone out on tour with ZZ Top. And ZZ Top had a 75, it was their Taking Texas to the World tour. I had been named the official ambassador of Texas culture to the world for the sake of this tour. Me, a Jewish kid from Buffalo, New York, who certainly did not grow up in Texas. And but I was steeped in Texas culture, and I believed in the right of Texas culture to exist. And they had a 75-foot wide stage in the shape of the state of Texas, tilted at an angle, so you could see that it was shaped in the state of in the shape of the state of Texas. A 75-foot stage. The Jacksons had a 110-foot stage.
Wow.
By comparison, like 50% larger. The biggest stage I had ever seen in my life. So I waited. I sat and waited for the Jacksons to finish their rehearsal. And when they did, we all trailed out to a dressing trailer. Have you ever been in a dressing trailer? So it's a trailer, you know, it's a trailer, it's a truck that you can drive around, but it's a very long truck. And the whole rear is converted to a dressing room. And they're used in Hollywood all the time, all the time. Now, film is on set, there will be dressing trailers all over the place. So we filed into this dressing trailer late at night. By now it was midnight. And I don't remember if anybody even turned on the lights, but it had these banquettes of red plastic seats across from each other, you know, on either side of the trailer. And then from all the banquettes of seats, the banquettes were like this, was this little catty corner seat next to the entrance that was only big enough for two people. That was the throne. Right, so Michael sat at the throne, which was right next to the door, and I sat at his immediate left-hand side, which is his non-threatening side, but it's a side where you can take over the room if you need to. And positioning in a meeting is extremely important. Your physical location in a meeting is extremely important. If you're a person who has truths that he needs to say and needs to be taken seriously. And Michael, the tour had been getting incredibly bad press. There was a guy named Dave Marsh, who was one of the lead sheep among the critics. In other words, everything he did, everybody else did. Everything he said, we know everybody of significance in the music industry. And nobody we know has been hired to build the stage for the Jackson tour, so the stage will collapse. Nobody we know has been hired to do the sound, so the sound equipment will electrocute the performers. Nobody we know has been hired to build those five-story high towers, lighting towers, And so the light in the audience and kill people. And nobody we know has been hired to do security. So there will be gangs running up and down the aisles with knives, killing people. And you don't dare take your kids to one of these concerts. And his message was being repeated everywhere. Well, I had all I knew was these things are false. I had no idea of why they were false. And now Michael explained to me for the first time why they were false. And he said, look, a year and a half ago, I found absolutely the best people to create a stage. I found absolutely the best people to do the lighting. I found absolutely the best people to do the sound. And I found absolutely the best people, not just for security, but I found the most amazing magicians I could find. So we could work on costumes, special effects, and all. And my goal, God has given me a gift. And that gift is the quality of awe, wonder, surprise, astonishment. And because God has given me that gift, I owe that gift to my kids. And Javier, I've only had about 4 visions in my entire lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And this was one of them. And I saw Michael's ribs turn to golden gates. And I saw his ribs, those golden gates, open. And I saw 10,000 kids inside of him. The kids that Michael was utterly dedicating to protect. And he explained that my brother Jackie, he said, is the best dancer I've ever seen. Now think of that statement. Who studied more dancers more intensely than anybody else in the 20th and 21st century? Who studied everybody from Fred Astaire to James Brown and learned to not just their moves, but to better their moves, go far beyond them? Michael Jackson. He is the expert on pop dance. And if he says his brother Jackie is the best dancer he's ever seen in his life, he is not kidding around. That is an expert judgment. And he said, I owe my kids the best. Jackie's the best choreographer I've ever seen. He's the best dancer I've ever seen. My brother Jackie has come down with a bone chip in his knee. And I knew that because I'd flown out to the West Coast and organized the press conference at the hospital when Jackie was getting arthroscopic surgery, the press conference with the surgeons. The surgeons expected that he would be better. Jackie would be better in time for the tour. He wasn't. And Michael wanted to delay the tour until his brother could be better because he owed his audience the absolute best, the stunning and astonishing things they would ever see in their life. And he felt that if Jackie was not on that stage with him, he would be cheating his audience of that all-wonderful prize. And that's when I continued to see these golden gates. And I continued to see those 10,000 kids behind them that Michael was absolutely determined to protect their right to awe, wonder, and surprise. The second law of science. Look at things right under your nose, as if you've never seen them before, and then proceed from there. But I also knew certain basic truths, and I knew them absolutely. And I knew that if Michael canceled this tour, all of the rumors, all of the press stories about this thing being handled by amateurs would be validated.
Yeah.
And parents would not dare send their kids. Michael's kids would never be able to come to see the concert he had prepared for a year and a half to awe them. And he would lose everything that he was going for. And Michael had the power of a Moses. He had the power of a prophet. His truths were absolute. I have the power of a prophet sometimes, not all the time, but when there is something vital that you must know in order to achieve your goal. And when your goal is opening up the souls of your fellow human beings, by opening up your soul, then I can tell you certain things you absolutely must know. So it was 2 prophets going up against each other, 2 Moses parting the Red Sea up against each other. And we weren't up against each other. We were a synergy. We were a common unit. We were out for each other at all costs because I believe in the truth at any price, including the price of your life. And look at things right under your nose as you've never seen them before. Those are the very fabric of my being. In the same way that Michael's kids and awe, wonder, and surprise are the very fabric of his being. So he changed his mind, and the tour went forward.
Wow.
But again, I learned from those 2 encounters. Encounter number 1, where Michael was having aesthetic orgasms, that Michael was awe, wonder, and surprise come to life in a way I never imagined in my lifetime. What did I learn from the second encounter? That Michael was absolute commitment to his audience, the truth at any price, including the price of your life, courage, in a way I had never, ever seen it before, because frankly, Michael didn't care about himself at all. He only cared about himself to the extent that he was the conduit, the pipe, through which this awe, wonder, and surprise flowed from God as he saw it to his kids. So that's why Michael became the living embodiment, the incarnation of everything I had ever believed in my life. And it's why if people like John Mellencamp and Prince and Bob Marley were a 10, Michael was 100.
Wow.
Michael was something so far beyond anything I'd ever imagined in a human being that it was as if he were a god on earth. It was as if he were an angel. It was as if he were a saint. There was something very special about him that I never expected to see in my lifetime.
Wow. I mean, I'm completely mesmerized. I mean, but yeah, I always felt it. You know, I was in one of the concerts of Michael in Spain, and throughout all my life, I was a big fan of Michael, and I could sense this difference, that he was different. He was going beyond. He was truly going beyond in so many ways. And so this connects with something that you write about in the book as well, that I found so interesting. You say that your job was to find the gods inside of you, to find the soul in you. You talk about this soul that is responsible for the magic, right? For the music, the lyrics, all the wonderful things. What is this? This gods inside of you. Tell us something about this. This is fascinating.
Okay, well, when I was 12 years old, I'd probably read Bertrand Russell on Christianity or something like that, and I realized that I was an atheist. And I put that realization aside. I wouldn't actually confess it to myself because I had a bar mitzvah coming up. And the bar mitzvah, it was going to be the first party I was ever invited to in Buffalo, New York in my life. And it was going to give me presents, lots of presents. And who can resist presents in a party, right? Especially if it's the only party you've ever had. So I waited until after the bar mitzvah, and it took me 2 months to write the thank you notes. The bar mitzvah was in June. It took me until August to write the thank you notes. And then when I was finished writing the thank you notes, I could confess to myself that I was an atheist. But that was 2 weeks before the high holidays in the Jewish calendar, which usually come in early September. So my parents, for the high holidays, managed to get me dressed in a suit, which is a miracle because I hate suits. I don't know how they did it. And then they put me in a blue Fraser four-door American-made automobile and drove me off to Richmond Avenue, which is where the synagogue was. And then I refused to go any further. So there was a point where I was holding on to the door frame with both hands, the frame of the car. Parents were pulling at my ankles, trying to drag me out of the car like a sack of potatoes.
Wow.
They'd been to drag me 2 blocks up the street, turning my face into hamburger, if that's what was necessary to get me to the synagogue. And I had this sudden realization. I realized that Galileo, who was the embodiment of the first law of science, Galileo had accomplished what he'd accomplished by taking a newly devised device that had been created for horizontal viewing. It had been created as a military device to allow you to see the army of the Spanish coming over the horizon, invented by somebody in the Netherlands, Hans Lippershey, and the Netherlands were under attack from the Holy Roman Empire, which was based at that point in Spain. And so the device was there to show you the troops coming over the horizon before those troops could realize that you already understood they were there. So it was called a spyglass, and it was a tube, and it had a lens on this end, and it had a lens on this end. So Galileo's audacious move was to take those lenses and take that device and turn them in a new direction, up. And that was outrageous. Galileo was going to look at the sky.
Yeah.
This spyglass, that's outrageous. Why? Because the sky is God's underwear. You don't peek under God's underwear. And everybody knew what was in the sky. Aristotle had said perfect shape was the circle. So the sky was filled with perfect shapes, with circles. And what did Galileo discover by this peeping Tommy of God's own territory? That planets look like rocks, that moons look like rocks, that our moon looked like a rock filled with pockmarks, that it's anything but perfect. And that changed our whole view of our relationship to the universe. And the guy who was the living embodiment of the second law of science, look at things right under your nose, was Anton von Leeuwenhoek. And Anton von Leeuwenhoek invented the microscope. And how did he do that? The lens actually was a high-tech device, but it had been around for 400 years. Lord knows why all of a sudden it was high-tech. So Van Leeuwenhoek was a draper. He imported fabrics from all over the world to Amsterdam. And he would check the drapery, the fabric, with a lens to see how regular the weave was, just how finely made this fabric was. And he decided to turn his lens in a new direction too. He turned it down. And he looked at pond water, and he looked at human sperm. And what did he discover? Little beings that he called animalcules. Little animals, totally independent, that we had been sharing our world with ever since we had evolved as human beings, and we had never known existed before, the world of microbes. So there I am. My parents are nearly shredding my socks, trying to drag me up the street. I'm holding on to the door frame, and I realize there are no gods in the sky because I'm an atheist, right? There are no gods underneath the earth because I'm an atheist. So where are the gods in this picture? They're all over the place. Where are they really? They're in my parents. They're in the absolute passion to get me to that synagogue, even if my face is turned to hamburger. And if the gods are in my parents, then they're in me someplace. So my job became to turn the lens not up, not down, but in. Now, I was not to find the gods inside. Now, I was not the first person to turn the lens inside. Sigmund Freud had already done that. But I was in search of the ecstatic experience. I don't know where I got an idea that the ecstatic experience even existed, because it certainly didn't exist in the conservative Judaism of my parents. You went to a synagogue that was like a Lutheran church. It had these pews made out of wood. And to get to your seat in the pew and get past the knees of other people in the pew, you had to go sideways. And once you were in that pew, you were a prisoner. You had these prayer books in front of you on the back of the seats in front of you, but you were penned in. And you stood when the rabbi told you to stand, and you sat when the rabbi told you to sit, and you recited when the rabbi told you to recite. It was the driest, most boring kind of ceremony in the world. I hated it. And for some reason, I knew there was an alternative. I knew there was an ecstatic alternative. And then, when I was 15 years old, a movie came out called Black Orpheus. And it was about the Macumba rituals in South America. And I saw for the first time a group of drummers standing around, people beginning to dance to the drummers, and then people being seized by the gods inside of them and writhing on the floor as if they were having an epileptic fit in the of the gods. And it was the first time that I saw the ecstatic experience that I was looking for. And when I was 14, I heard about the existence of a book called The Varieties of the Religious Experience, which sounded like exactly what I was looking for. It took 4 months to find that book. We had no Amazon in those days, and Buffalo is not a book-rich city, and the bookshops didn't have it. I finally found it at the University of Buffalo and read it, and it was as if William James, the founder of American psychology in 1902, when he wrote this book, was writing it to say, look, I'm leaving a bunch of extraordinary ecstatic experiences as specimens, like as if they were in petri dishes on a lab bench. I don't have the tools to understand these things in my time, but you, when you come along 50 years later, you will have those tools. So I am leaving them to you. Again, it was as if William James was speaking to me personally in this book. And one thing he said was incredibly important. He said, these ecstatic experiences, these out-of-body experiences, these experiences of visions that are nowhere near real are psychopathological. But in the hands of the right person, a psychopathology can become an engine of history. So I was in search. I got more validation of what I was looking for and more shaping of what I was looking for. And what he was telling me was, these ecstatic experiences you've been looking for are the forces of history. And then in my junior year of high school, we were told to read James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain, which was a new book at that time. And in it, there are 2 pages in which James Baldwin is seized by Christ. And he is almost rolling on the floor. And he is almost foaming at the mouth. So for 2 pages, you get a sense of what it's like on the inside, to be inside of that experience. So all of these things were adding to my experience of the gods inside. And then when I was 16, something really remarkable happened. The kids in my high school hated me. They were the same kids who hated me when I was a kid.
Yeah.
When I was 8 years old and 10 years old. And but there were jobs that had to be done at my school. And so when they elected class president, that was the most popular kid in the class. Of course, I was the most unpopular kid. When they elected vice president, that was the second most popular kid. When they voted for the secretary of the class, that was the most popular girl. And when they voted for treasurer, that was the most popular Jew. I wasn't any of those things. But when it came to getting things done that the other kids didn't want to have anything to do with, they elected me head. So they elected me head of something called the program in my junior year. There was a program in a school assembly 5 days a week before classes. It was 45 minutes. And I got to program 2 of those, and I got to MC, to be the announcer for all 5 of them. And for the first 2 months, going in front of an audience of 350 people was scary as hell. I had stage fright every single day. And then going in front of that audience became as natural as could possibly be. Well, one day, the juniors came to me, because I was elected for this 2 years in a row, which is very unusual in this school. And the juniors came to me and said, we're having a dance. Could you advertise it for us? Now, Javier, they didn't realize how outrageous their request was. If there was a party of any kind in Buffalo, New York, I was cordially invited to stay at least 200 miles away. And when it came to a dance, my parents every 2 years would try to make me normal. One year they tried it by sending me to summer camp. That didn't work at all. Then they tried sending me to dance class for a year. Well, I was totally incompetent, learning simple things like the box step, the foxtrot, the waltz, all the steps. I just couldn't master them at all. So asking me to advertise a dance was the cruelest thing in the world. But I did it. I put a record on the turntable and went in front of this audience of 350 people who hated me, and I started dancing. And because I can't dance, Javier, the dance was unlike anything you have ever seen in your life. It was like Looney Tune, Porky Pig, Daffy Duck, all those characters, Pepe Le Pew, drawn when Chuck Jones, the guy who drew all those things, had just dropped LSD, which didn't exist on the streets yet. It was the craziest thing you've ever seen in your life. And that's when I saw the eyes of the audience widening. And that's when I saw their pupils dilating. And that's when I saw their faces melting in awe, in absolute awe. And I watched the face of the girl who hated me the most in particular. She utterly melted. And then I saw them all 350 of them, melt into one common body of energy. As I said, like an amoeba, and reach a pseudopod out to me. And through that pseudopod, send all of its energy through me as if I were an empty pipe. And I had an out-of-body experience. I thought I was on the ceiling watching this whole thing from above. And I saw that energy flow through me to somewhere around my head, be utterly transmogrified, utterly transformed, flow back to that audience, and I saw their pupils widening even wider. And that energy of theirs flowed through me. It was a reverberatory circuit. It was a feedback loop. And it was a feedback loop of pure, if you'll excuse my language, fucking goddamn soul. Absolute soul.
Yeah.
I was taken. And the audience, when I finished, did something they had never done in that high school before and would never do again. And yet they did it so perfectly, it looked as if they'd been practicing it forever. They came to the foot of the stage. They picked me up off the stage. They carried me out on their shoulders. They carried me all the way to the building higher on the hill where we had our classes. And only when they reached that building did they put me down. It was the ecstatic experience I had been looking for. And it was my key to understanding my performers and their role in the lives of their audience. Without that experience, I wouldn't have understood them. I wouldn't have been able to find the gods inside of them.
Wow, that's amazing. So through that experience, really, you internalized that magic, that those gods inside those experiences, and then when you met and you worked with all these incredible performers later on, you could get that from them better than anybody, probably.
Absolutely, I knew what they were going through. When John Mellencamp's one of the most powerful performers you've ever seen in your life, or at least he was way back then. And when he came off stage, it was excruciating for him. Because, well, to tell you the story, let me go back to another performer. Once upon a time, George Harrison and Eric Clapton, or George Harrison and Peter Townsend of The Who, were trying to get Eric Clapton off of heroin. And George Harrison tried it, and he couldn't do it. So Peter Townsend went to Eric Clapton and said, look, I know what's happening with you. You go on stage, you're in front of 17,000 or 70,000 people. The souls of those 17,000 or 70,000 people flow through you as if you were an empty pipe to the Godhead. And in the Godhead, they are utterly transformed and flow back to the audience. And then that audience energy flows back through you again. It's the reverberatory circuit I was talking about.
Wow.
When you step off stage, you have just been a pipe that has contained 70,000 souls and the Godhead. And now when you step off stage, you are an empty pipe. And that emptiness hurts. Ache. And so you fill that aching space with heroin. And you've got to get off of it. So that is a perfect description of the performance experience at the highest level. And John Mellencamp, Prince, Joan Jett, Billy Idol, they all performed at this ecstatic level every time they went on stage. But John, when he came off stage, came out as a hollowed pipe. He looked like a scarecrow. It looked like there was no human inhabiting his body anymore. His eyes didn't look like eyes. They looked like these black caverns, empty caverns. So John came off stage like a robot, and he had a tiny room where nobody could get into. And he went into that tiny room, and he either had Vicky, his wife, with him, or he had me with him. And it took an hour, Javier, for his normal hello, how are you, fine, thank you very much, ordinary self, to return. And we're not talking mystic experiences here. We're talking human experiences that every single person watching this is capable of having. Whether they have it or not in a lifetime, that capability is in them. And when they see a John Mellencamp or a Prince, unfortunately they can't see a Prince on stage anymore, or Michael Jackson's different. So we'll set his performance aside because it's very different from anybody else I ever worked with. But when they see these people absolutely catch fire on stage, become a bonfire, a fireball on stage, it captures something in their soul, very deep in their soul. And it gives them an out-of-body experience for 70 minutes. And they have to come back to themselves. I remember watching, it was a movie by an incredibly popular, among intellectuals, Swedish film director of the 1950s. And this has happened to me several times. When a movie really reaches you, you have a choking in your throat and you have a cry. And when the lights go up, you do not want anybody to see you because you are practically crying. And it's going to take you 15 minutes to get yourself back together again. So you, as you're walking up the aisle, you are hoping nobody is looking at you and seeing your face.
Yeah.
And I used that phenomena to help save the movie Purple Rain for Prince. But that's another story. Yeah. So even you, as an audience member, are capable of going through something that wrenches you out of your normal self, in which it takes you 15 minutes for your normal self to return. Well, for the artist, it's an hour for his or her normal self to return. And after each performance, John Mellencamp would swear he was never going to tour again because the agony of going through that transformation from being a person who's a pipe of the Godhead and the souls of his audience to being empty as all hell and waiting for his normal self to return was so agonizing.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. Did this also? What about Michael? Michael Jackson? How was? Why? First of all, why was his performance different? Why was the performance different of Michael? And how did he go back after the performance?
I didn't get to see Michael after the performance because after each performance, I spent the performance wandering around backstage, taking notes on everything that was unusual that night.
Yeah.
And then when the concert was over, I had to go to the press box in the stadium we were in, and I had 200 press people who traveled with us and had little laptop computers. And I would give a press conference and just go through everything that I had seen backstage for these people. So I never got to see Michael when he came off stage. But one day, his manager, who was unfortunately one of the dumbest people I'd ever met in the record industry, said something very significant. Said, "You're not supposed to know this, but every night before Michael goes on stage, he has me find a cancer unit in a hospital, find 2 kids who are dying, who want more than anything else to see Michael Jackson in their lifetime. Bring those 2 kids to spend 45 minutes with Michael Jackson in his dressing room." And that's how he prepares to go in front of an audience of 60,000 people, which is highly unusual because it's scary to go before an audience of 60,000 people. Hang on. Oh, so Michael is very different from any performer I've ever seen. When John Mellencamp or Prince performs, every performance is different. Every performance is different because they are seized in the fists of the gods inside. And those gods make different maneuvers every single night. Michael is not like that at all. Michael has been studying show business. He's been studying it with his heart and his gut, and he's been studying it with his analytic powers since he was 6 years old. And so Michael plans out every move he is going to make on stage. And every show is exactly the same show. It's just he performs every single night as if he has never performed these moves before in his life. They are new. He has the souls of those 60,000 people inside of him. But unlike the other performers I've worked with, who are just bonfired by the experience, he is a contained bonfire. Yes, he has that bonfire within him, but he has absolute control and absolute mastery. And what is one of Michael's major inventions in the history of dance? Tap dance was invited as a street form of music back in the 1930s. And it took years before it was finally allowed into film, because blacks weren't allowed into film. But the first blacks to be allowed into film were tap dancers. And in evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology, we know that there are dominance gestures and there are submission gestures.
Yeah.
And because these guys were black, and because it was the first time blacks were allowed in a film, and because they were doing all the fancy maneuvers with their feet, they looked down at their feet to draw your attention to their feet, and they forgot about their hands. And their hands made submission gestures, apologies for being black and being. So their hands were like this when they danced. Now, if you watch the Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers movies, there is nothing convincing about those movies at all. There is no way in the world that in real life Ginger Rogers would even pay any attention to Fred Astaire. Why? Because he's a white man picking up a black form called tap dancing. And yes, he's doing it brilliantly, but he also hasn't noticed that because the black guys did submission gestures with their hands, he's doing submission gestures too. And courting a female, even among humans, is not convincing if he's doing submission gestures. He's convincing if he does dominance gestures. So what was one of Michael's greatest additions to dance? He didn't do this anymore when he was dancing. He used his hands like this, and here in the screen, he used his hands like this and like this. He pointed at the floor. He pointed into the distance.
Dominant.
Yes, these are dominance gestures. These are gestures of command, not submission. And Michael was brilliant at them. I mean, you know, Michael and his handshake, if I were to rate it on a scale of utterly limp, 0, to trying to crush your bones and prove to you that he's the strongest man on earth, which is 100, Michael's handshake was a 40.
Huh.
It was a little limper than normal, but only the tiniest bit. But when he was on stage, he was the master and commander of all that he saw. And you felt that free and command, and you felt it largely because of those commanding gestures of his. And what did he do to accentuate your attention to his hands, to the gestures of command? He wore one white glove. And this is I never got to talk to Michael about P.T. Barnum, which is too bad, because P.T. Barnum was a genius, and he was a genius getting awe, wonder, and surprise. And one day he gave a workman of his 7 bricks, and he said, "Go out into the pavement in front of my American Museum in downtown New York City, and put the bricks on the pavement over on the left-hand side in a pattern. Then pick the bricks up, go over to the right-hand side, and put them down in another pattern. Then move to the center and put the bricks in another pattern." And sure enough, people found this fascinating. They were trying to figure out the underlying purpose of this, and they couldn't. And it fascinated them. And he ended up with hundreds of people fascinated on that sidewalk, watching this guy with his bricks, trying to figure out what the hell he was doing. So not only was P.T. Barnum brilliant at capturing your attention, he was brilliant at rousing awe, wonder, and surprise. And Michael knew that about P.T. Barnum. And Michael knew that if he only had one glove, than if he had 2 gloves. Simple, very simple, right? Like moving the bricks around on the pavement, but yet so astonishingly brilliant. And what did it draw attention to? It drew attention to his hands. And why draw attention to his hands? Because Michael was making a new gesture, not just unique to our culture in dance, but unique to Black culture. And it was the kind of gesture saying, we are beyond race here. We have gone utterly beyond race here. We are on a plane of awe, wonder, and surprise where race doesn't matter at all. That's what he's saying.
Beautiful.
Through his careful dance on stage. And Michael was self-conscious as hell. He would come off of stage, off of a perfect performance, after a performance that was not only perfect, but in which all his heart and soul was invested. So much so that John Perales of the New York Times, who's very hard to impress, said you would think that an artist who is able to take his best takes in the studio and compile a song of his best takes could not possibly equal, much less exceed, his studio performance or his studio dance performance for TV film, an MTV music video, that he couldn't possibly equal that on stage. And in essence, what Michael Perales was saying, or John Perales was saying, is Michael not only equals the impossibility of a studio performance, he exceeds the intensity of those studio performances. And he does it every single night. And yet he comes on stage criticizing himself, thinking of the 10 moves that he thinks he didn't do quite perfectly, wanting to get validation, just like you and I would get validation by telling somebody about it. But it's hard to believe that there are any imperfections, because you haven't seen an imperfection at all. You've seen an astonishment that goes so far beyond perfection and imperfection that it defies belief. So Michael's performance was radically different. Yes, he contained all of the fires of the ecstatic experience every night, but he contained and controlled them because he had been containing and controlling them since he was 9 years old. I mean, who did he see that he admired the most? Jackie Wilson and James Brown. What character do those two guys have? They put so much of themselves into each performance that it was as if they put 3 selves into each performance. James Brown called himself the hardest working guy in show business for a reason. James Brown claimed he pounds with each of his performances. And so these guys were utterly and completely possessed by two things: soul and control. The gods inside and the ability to channel, to run those gods along pathways that would provide astonishment for their fellow human beings. And it was that quality of being utterly taken over by the gods inside of you, and yet having some control over how you channel it to your audience, that captured Michael. My vocabulary is different from Michael's. It's taken me 40 years to work it out. And if you go back to the time I was 12, it's taken even longer than that to work it out. I wish I could discuss it with Michael right now, right here. Those were not Michael's words. Those are mine. Those are not Michael's metaphors. Those are mine. But that's what Michael did. That's what Michael was. That's why Michael was so special. That's why it was such an agony that this absolutely astonishing saint of a human being should spend 25 years of a 50-year life becoming Michael Jackson, and then 25 years crucified by negative stories. 25 years dangling on the cross with nails through his wrists and his ankles. It was a nightmare. What Michael deserved so much better than that. And basically, Michael was stolen from all of us. And there's this line in the book, in Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me. If you loved Michael Jackson, you knew him better than anyone who ever wrote a story about him. Because some truth in you was responding to the deep truths in him. And you knew he was not just for real, but he was beyond extraordinary. You knew that. Even if your conscious brain, your quibbling, rational, verbal brain was saying, oh no, this guy is a pederast, he took advantage of children, he was of no value, he was a monster, he just had some catchy songs. Even if your logical brain thinks that, if you loved Michael Jackson in your gut knows Michael Jackson far better than your quibbling verbal brain.
Totally. I mean, wow. I mean, I'm speechless because the way you express these deep experiences is so profound and is so beautiful. Wow, and you know, you are going now into territory where I wanted to go, because you know, one of the things that really impressed me in the book and in other interviews with you is precisely what you are talking about. All these dark forces, all this pressure, you know, the press, all these movements around you. Even mentioned that somebody told you that Michael Jackson got like 300 death threats a day. I mean, yeah. All this stuff. I mean, was this happening to all of these celebrities and rock stars, or was it way beyond with Michael Jackson? Because it's crazy.
Michael. Yeah, it was. Michael was a phenomenon beyond anything we've seen in our lifetime. He was beyond Elvis and the Beatles combined. And the result was one day the Jacksons were about to perform at the Meadowlands, which is over in New Jersey, near New York City. And they were staying again at the Helmsley Palace. And I went in to see them. And the minute I got in the door of the hotel, one of the Jacksons' entourage grabbed me and said, we have big trouble, we need your help. And the problem was, pictures of Michael Jackson were so brought you so much money if you were a photographer, that photographers were stalking Michael. So there were 2 entrances and exits to the hotel. And both those exits were being staked out. So Michael and his brothers had limousines planted at those exits from the hotel, so that as decoys, so that the press and the photographers, the journalists and photographers who were staking out Michael, would be fooled and would follow the limousines. And they went in something closer to a laundry truck. It's a kind of van popular use today, and it's replaced limousines. Back then, no performers used these vans. They all used limousines. So they would leave from the laundry exit, where the laundry trucks pulled up and exited. So they pulled out in their van to go over to the Meadowlands to do a sound check. And and there was a car following them. And they didn't realize it till they got to, I think, 11th Avenue. 11th Avenue or 10th Avenue is a divided highway, which is rare in New York City. And the traffic moves at a good clip. So they took a left on 11th Avenue, and a car was following them. And the car was trying to do stunt driving. It was trying to do something you only see in movies. It was trying to catch up with them, get past them, and then block the street. In other words, this is the direction of traffic on the street, and the car was trying to do this. So it would block all the traffic, so it would stop the Jacksons dead in their tracks, and could jump out and get pictures. So it didn't work. These guys could not pull ahead of the Jacksons' van. So they jumped the divider. Now, Javier, think of this.
Wow.
It's a Sunday. They're jumping a divider into the opposing lane of traffic.
Crazy.
People are taking their families on trips. They are taking a chance on killing families because they'll have a head-to-head collision. So they jumped the divider. They drove past the Jacksons' van. They jumped the divider again, and they came catty corner again, blocking the whole lane of traffic. And they jumped out of their cars. So the Jackson security people go through 300 death threats a day, and they don't know which ones are for real and which ones aren't. And they don't have any idea of who the people are in this car. So when they get out of the car, the Jackson security guys, one of them is carrying a tire iron. And seeing the tire iron in his hand, journalist and photographer who just jumped out of the car, go back in the car and get a gun.
Whoa.
So these two guys, New York Post photographer and a New York Post writer, go back to their typewriters, and they write a story saying that they were just threatened by the Jackson security, which is a very popular story, kind of story back then.
Yeah.
And I was being told as I walked into the hotel, is this story is about to go to press in 2 hours. You're the only one who could stop it. So I interviewed everybody who'd been involved in this van thing, including LaToya, who'd been in the van with Michael and the brothers. I got all the facts together. The facts made the New York Post people look terrible. They were terrible. It turned out that the New York Post guy who pulled a gun had been arrested for pulling the gun before. And then somebody was kind enough to give me the phone number of the country club where the owner of the New York Post was golfing. And I called him and I said, you have this story that's about to run in 2 hours. It's a false story. If you run the story, I will be forced to put out the real story. And that will make your people look very, very bad.
Yeah.
And so he withdrew the story. But that's the kind of thing that used to happen with the Jacksons. Now, why did it happen with the Jacksons? Yeah. Jacksons Michael represented more power and more money than anybody else in the 20th century. Anybody else in the 20th century. And the result was people flocked around him who wanted a piece of that money and power. And they were people, one of them in particular, with really malevolent, evil intentions. So when it came to that negative story, those two people were putting together, the journalist and the photographer for the New York Post, when we were out on tour, earlier in the tour, I was carrying these 200 press people around with me. And one of the people from the Boston Herald told me a story. He said, okay, we were all in the newsroom, 40 reporters in one big room, and the publisher came downstairs. And the publisher said, tomorrow we're doing a Michael Jackson cover. And we all said, no, we're not going to do a Michael Jackson cover. We're a legitimate newspaper. We've done 9 Pulitzer Prizes. We're not going to disgrace ourselves by putting a popular celebrity on the cover. And the publisher said, tomorrow we're going to have a Michael Jackson cover, and walked out of the room. So now you have to understand some positioning here. This was the Boston Herald American, which was the second paper in town. The primary paper in town was the Boston Globe, prestige paper, which had won 27 Pulitzers, not 9, 27.
Wow.
And the Boston Globe was considered one of the nation's leading newspapers. And the Boston Globe outsold the Boston Herald American by 20,000 copies a day.
20,000?
Yes. The day that the Boston Herald American put Michael Jackson on the cover and all of the reporters objected, guess what happened? They outsold the Boston Globe by 30,000 newspapers.
Wow.
In other words, Michael Jackson meant money.
Yeah.
So the next day, the publisher of the Boston Herald American came back downstairs to the newsroom and pointed at his rock writer and said, I'm giving you your own private office and your own secretary. From now on, I want a Michael Jackson story every single day.
Wow.
And the publisher at the Boston Globe also came down to the newsroom, pointed at his rock writer, and said, I'm giving you your own secretary and your own office. I want a Michael Jackson story every day.
Huh.
Now imagine that all around the country. Now think of yourself as a magazine publisher. You can't find a good Michael Jackson story. What do you do to have a Michael Jackson story in the paper? You go scrounging for any negative story you can find. And the slogan, if it bleeds, it leads. In other words, awful stuff outsells good stuff. So which do you think is going to sell more newspapers?
Yeah.
A negative Michael Jackson story or a positive Michael Jackson story? And if you involve sex somehow, then you'll really sell.
Yeah.
So to explain what happened next, I have to tell you a story.
Mm-hmm.
Billy Joel loves his motorcycles.
Billy Joel.
And I was a motorcycle fan too. I had my own motorcycle and used it to commute into work.
Mm-hmm.
And so Billy is one day riding his motorcycle out on Long Island, and he sees a green light up ahead. Now, Javier, what do you do when you see a green light? Do you stop or do you continue?
You go.
Continue. And there was a car coming on the other lane that had a red light.
Mm-hmm.
And it went through the intersection anyway and tried to make a left turn. Billy tried to stop his motorcycle, but he was not within braking distance. He could not stop his motorcycle in time. So he smashed it into this car that had just gone through a red light and cut him off. And his body went flipping over the car, and he landed on the other side. And the 27-year-old female driver inside was hysterical, and she thought she had just killed a motorcyclist. And she got out of the car and ran over to him. And in fact, he had to be medevaced by a helicopter to Lenox Hill Hospital in Manhattan. And the fear was that he would lose the use of his right hand. Now, remember, Billy is a piano man. He comes alive.
Yeah.
He wrote a song about that. He comes alive most when he's pounding on the keys in front of an audience.
Yeah.
So you would have deprived America of a public treasure, Billy's ability to play the piano with two hands, and you would have deprived him of the thing he loved and found meaning the most in his life. So, but the driver must have gone to a lawyer, and the lawyer probably said something like, look, you don't understand. You just hit the jackpot. You didn't cause this accident. He caused the accident. Remember, he hit you. And if you claim, and if you threaten a lawsuit against him, you will be threatening him with negative headlines. And he's a superstar, and he can't afford negative headlines. So he will buy you off. And sure enough, this woman was bought off with $250,000 when she was totally at fault.
Wow.
Now imagine that you're a divorced woman and you want money, you're greedy for money, but you don't really have a way of making all that much money. And your kid falls in love with Michael Jackson and has the good fortune of meeting Michael Jackson, and the two of them are crazy about each other. So your kid has the privilege of spending time with Michael Jackson. You're delighted. You're delirious. Nothing like this has ever happened to you in your life. And the kid does overnights with Michael. And what's an overnight? Do you remember the first sleepover you ever had with other kids? I mean, these things are absolutely exhilarating.
Mm-hmm.
And you end up until 6 a.m. You just can't stop. And it's an astounding experience. Well, Michael had that with his kids. Remember, Michael suffered something called childhood deprivation, play deprivation. There's a researcher who came to visit me in the room where I'm speaking to you right now, a long time ago, and he did research on mice, and baby mice, play with each other. And that's when they established their dominance patterns. Who's dominant over who? If you take mice and you deprive them of the period of life in which they play, and then you let them out amongst their contemporaries, they will make up for every minute you deprive them of play, because they're suffering from play deprivation. Well, Michael was suffering from childhood deprivation.
Yeah.
That's why he was so attracted to children. And you have to understand something else. Michael's bedroom was not a private place.
Uh-huh.
It was a public place.
It was a public
For
place. It
example,
was open to everybody.
well, not that it was open to everybody, but when Michael and Lionel Richie were asked to co-write "We Are the World,"
Mhm.
Lionel, who is also a client of mine, says he went over to Michael's house. Michael and he went into Michael's bedroom. They lay on the floor writing lyrics and exchanging lyrics, and all of a sudden, he, Lionel, felt something eyeing him from 1.5 feet off the floor, precisely his eye level. And he couldn't figure out what in the world was that height. Humans, after all, are usually over 4 feet tall. And he turned slowly to see what had locked eyes on him, and it was Michael's boa constrictor muscles, sizing him up to see whether he would make an adequate meal. So that was the nature of Michael's bedroom. It was not a private place, it was a public place.
Interesting.
So when Mike had sleepovers, the odds are 85% that they were totally innocent, that they were like the sleepovers you remember from your childhood. But what if you get an idea? You're one of these mothers, you're unstable, you were, again, are divorced and single, and you don't have a regular livelihood, or even if you do, it's minor, it's a dentist assistant or something like that. And all of a sudden you realize, if I sue Michael Jackson for sexually taking advantage of my child, I can get millions. You've hit the jackpot. So instead of getting a measly $25,000 or $250,000 like this woman did from Billy Joel, the first woman Michael had to buy off, if I remember the figure correctly, and I might remember it wrong, was $23 million.
Wow.
Big jackpot.
Ooh, that's a jackpot, indeed.
Yeah, and so if you're another mother whose son has spent time with Michael Jackson and who is in an equally unstable position, what do? How do you avoid the temptation even?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
The newspapers, meantime, need Michael Jackson headlines. And if those headlines contain sex, then they're going to outsell even a normal Michael Jackson headline. So you eat these things up and you encourage them. So women can win 2 jackpots in one. They can not only get the money, they can also be famous, even if that fame only lasts 5 days. And how can you resist that?
Yeah.
How can you?
Totally. That's yeah.
So Michael spent the last 25 years of his life dangling on the cross. The thorns, the nails in his wrists and ankles were these accusations, these sexual accusations. And in time, over the course of time, every one of them has been proven false. Every single one of them has been proven false. But 2 years ago or so, Leaving Neverland came out, a film. And it was a film with 2 people who claimed that they were these little boys that Michael was molesting sexually. And their stories were extraordinarily convincing. Extraordinarily convincing. But Michael has fans all over the world. And those fans know every detail of his life. And they know every person who's ever been in his life. And those fans went scrupulously over the stories of his life and discovered that the claims these people were making couldn't possibly be true, because they claimed with precise dates to be in a certain place, and Michael wasn't in that place at that time. And there were all kinds of other inconsistencies. Plus, in the 1980s, psychotherapists, a small number of them, signed on to a new craze. And the new craze was childhood sexual molestation. And those psychotherapists said, if you don't remember any incidents of being sexually molested in your youth, that proves that you were sexually molested. Now think about that for a minute. It means that the assumption is everybody was sexually molested.
Yeah, exactly.
You can implant memories through suggestion. For example, a memory researcher named Elizabeth Loftus. She's a friend of mine. And Elizabeth Loftus did an experiment. She showed 2 batches of college kids the same film. And then she quizzed one batch of college student about the film, and she left the other group alone. Now, here's what happened in that quiz. She said, It was a picture of a car going down a road, very much like the road that Billy Joel was on, coming to an intersection, very much like the intersection Billy Joel came to. And the questioners would say, when you pass that barn on the right and you approach the car that was coming from the other direction, what was the blonde driver doing? Well, 6 months later, they brought the two groups of college kids back in for questioning. The group that had no questions after the film realized that it was a brunette driver and there was no barn. The kid who had been asked about the barn and the blonde driver vividly remembered a blonde driver and vividly remembered a barn. They could picture both of them.
Wow.
When Elizabeth Loftus showed some of these students the actual film again, after they had described the incident with the barn and the blonde driver, they said, this can't be the film that I saw 6 months ago. It isn't the film that I saw 6 months ago. This is a brunette driver, and there is no barn. Well, that was the film. So that's how easy it is to plant false memories. And in the 1980s, planting false memories became a cottage industry among certain psychotherapists. I dated one of them once.
Wow.
Until she realized I did not share her point of view. And then she talked me out, basically. So that's how these false memories may have occurred. They may have been implanted in these two kids who were interviewed in Leaving Neverland. And false memories, as you can see from Elizabeth Loftus's experiment, are vivid. You can picture things in these memories that have been planted in you by a dedicated psychologist or a psychoanalyst. Picture them vividly. You know absolutely they were part of your childhood. And guess what? They weren't. They weren't. So the odds are 85% that Michael Jackson was not a sexual predator. I mean, he was one of the people who read this book, Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me, said, I went into this book thinking that Michael Jackson was a pedophile and a trivially insignificant artist who just had some catchy songs. I came out of this book in tears for the fact that one of the most luminous personalities in the history of this planet had been taken from us. It was an astonishing set. It's an author named Helen Zuman who wrote a book called Captivity, Mating in the Wild. That's what it's called. So, and that's what I tried to do. I tried to give you the sense of Michael that I had, because my feeling was this. Once upon a time, 1954, physiologists knew with absolute precision that humans could never run a mile in less than 4 minutes. A medical student in England and one of his fellow medical students started analyzing every one of the moves he made when he was running and getting rid of all of the moves that wasted energy. So he could take every bit of energy he had and put it into running. And in the end, he broke the 4-minute mile.
Wow.
Some physiologists had said was impossible. Well, since then, 1,800 people have broken the 4-minute mile.
Yeah.
If you look up the 4-minute mile on Wikipedia, it says that every major professional runner breaks the 4-minute mile. It's automatic. And the physiologist said it couldn't be done. In the same way that Roger Bannister broke through, he expanded the boundaries of human possibility. And in the same way that he expanded those boundaries, Michael Jackson should have been given the right to expand those boundaries, because that's what he was here for. To expand the boundaries, the envelope of perception for all of humanity. And apparently, well, so look, I try to get across the truth I saw with Michael Jackson. So he is finally given that privilege, not just of expanding your perceptual boundaries and your boundaries of possibility, but so he can expand the boundaries of perception and possibility for all humankind, because that's why he was here, no matter how many negative people preyed upon him and crucified him in the end. There was something you must know about Michael Jackson if you are going to know what your possibilities are and what the possibilities of this species we belong to are. And apparently the book, I I didn't think I could accomplish that, because I'm a mere mortal, after all. But I've been working on my writing since I was 12. It's been one of the most important things in the world to me. And this was a truth of such power. Again, it's an instantiation, a manifestation of flesh, blood, and spirit of everything that I've ever believed in. And so I tried with all my might, and everybody that's read the book, that's made a comment, basically says you achieved it. And if I've achieved it on your behalf, then I have done my purpose here on Earth, or at least a part of it.
Absolutely. I mean, you just express it so beautifully and so deeply. And, I've been a fan of Michael all my life, but through your writing and through your, talking about it and everything, I've gone even deeper, much deeper than ever into the essence of Michael, because you just express it so beautifully and deeply. And especially what really, really shocked me, which I think a lot of people never realized about, is the tremendous pressure and these dark forces. I mean, to be for so many years surrounded by all, everybody with these temptations to run all this negativity around Michael and everything. This is incredibly, I don't even know how anybody can survive something like that. So do you think that the way we lost Michael, and you begin your book with the death of Michael Jackson, that's how you begin the book. Do you think that was inevitable, unfortunately, at the end, because of all this crazy negativity around him, all this pressure?
More was being asked of him than he could possibly give. And he was preparing for, I think, a 100-date tour.
Yeah.
And rehearsing for it. And remember the God's inside. Remember these ecstatic experiences that you have on stage in front of an audience. Michael was having that experience in every rehearsal.
Yeah.
So it's very hard for him to come back down from that high. And that's why he was taking the propofol. But I'm sure the reason he started taking drugs was because of all of these attacks, because his life had become almost unbearable. And there's no way Michael's death should have been inevitable. If this were a just universe, Michael would be alive today. If this were a just universe, Michael and I would still be talking to each other about these things, because I understand them in ways none of the people around him apparently did. And he needed validation for what he was doing. He needed somebody who would understand and validate. But I was torn away from Michael very deliberately, probably by the same person who was behind that statement, you've got to be out here by 11 o'clock tonight. Michael is canceling his tour, and you're the only one he'll listen to. Because I was a person who was the only one Michael would listen to, I was a danger to the person who was the darkest force trying to glom up his power, the power and money that he represented. So I was separated from Michael very deliberately. And I've never been able, I have many conversations I wanted to continue with him, because I would have been a mentor for him. I would have been a source of support for what he is. I would have been a source of belief in what he is. And apparently, though, he surrounded himself with some brilliant people, like David Geffen, who's extremely smart, and Quincy Jones, who I never met, but seems to be extremely smart. Somebody should have been there to support him, and nobody was. Nobody was. There was nobody who understood his experience and could validate it for him. And I am so regretful of the fact that I can't go back and do that for him. And that now that he's dead, there's no possibility of doing that for him.
Yeah.
I've done to seemingly change subjects. I appear regularly on the highest rated overnight talk radio show in North America. It's called Coast to Coast AM. And I've done 343 appearances on Coast to Coast. And after my first 7 years of appearing on the show, my producer called me one night and she said, could you please stop talking about Michael Jackson? That's how deep the truth is that Michael represented to me. I could not stop talking about Michael. And it wasn't because his name is famous. It was because of what he represented in the world of spirit, soul, and the gods inside of us.
Yeah.
I was over by him. And I'm a science person. Theoretically, I'm not supposed to be bowled over, but hey, that's what I was hunting for. I was hunting for the ecstatic experience because as a scientist, I had my orders. Well, I got my orders long before I discovered William James, but William James validated them and said, this is something that science should be capable of understanding and studying. And then I have a friend named Robin Fox. He's a big fan of my work. Robin Fox has written some leading books in anthropology from Oxford University Press, and he is the founder of the anthropology department at Rutgers University.
Mm-hmm.
And Robin introduced me to a term that I had never heard in science, participant observer science. It means you throw yourself into the experience with everything you are, and you experience it to the nth degree, and only then try to describe it. And the perfect example is Margaret Mead, who, when she went to Samoa, didn't just study a tribe from the outside and take notes. She absorbed every norm of that tribe so completely that they decided to make her a tribal chief. Now, it was totally against their tradition to make a woman a tribal chief.
Yeah.
And especially an outsider tribal chief. But she absorbed that culture so thoroughly that she was the epitome, the living example of that culture. And that's what I was fortunate enough to be able to do in a land of rock and roll, looking for the gods inside and finding them inside of people like Prince and Michael Jackson and Bob Marley and John Mellencamp and many more. 27 of them, I think, are in this book altogether.
Wow. Amazing. And this is actually a perfect time already moving towards the end of this incredible conversation to tell our audience that not only Howard was working and a publicist and working with some of the biggest stars in history, Michael Jackson, Prince, Bob Marley, etc. But he is an incredible scientist as well, an incredible scientific career. 10 years old, right? You were already doing microbiology and theoretical physics. I mean, since very, very young. And this really fascinates me. Your science, your scientific career, and your popular culture career. What is for you the relationship and the connection between both you as a scientist and you as this master of popular culture? How do you connect
totally
both?
Connected. They're totally connected because science is about the aspiration to omniscience. Mm-hmm. There's a program that I wrote a while ago, and I can't get it in front of me, but it says, since there is no God, it is our job to do his work. So we have imagined omniscience, but there is no God who is omniscient. So whose job is it to be omniscient? It's ours. And that means science has to look at things right under its nose and then proceed from there. And one of the greatest things under our nose is the subjective experience, which it turns out is not subjective because we live with crowds inside of us. And we live for the sake of the crowds outside of us. And the greatest manifestation of that is in the land of soul, the land of the gods inside, the land of the ecstatic experience. And so these are experiences that are basic to human nature and to our nature as groups needing to find voices. Because when we speak powerfully, we speak on behalf of a subculture that didn't previously recognize its commonality, its common identity. We speak on behalf of people who felt lost and who felt that they were crazy because they had experiences and emotions that no one else had ever had and that weren't reflected in the words of our culture, in the cliches of our culture. And suddenly a Michael Jackson comes along, or a Prince comes along, or a Joan Jett comes along, and is a tongue for a subculture that was aching for an identity. Tells individuals, no, you are not insane. In fact, you are part of groups of thousands and millions. And you are not insane and alone, you are a movement. That is one of the most important things in humanity. That is how the ecstatic experience becomes important in the forces of history. Because these subcultures do make history. They make it what it is. The Jazz Age, why do we call the 1920s the Jazz Age? Because it was characterized by its music, because its music was associated with its lifestyle, because its lifestyle gave kids an opportunity, that is teenagers, an opportunity to express their identity in ways they had never had before, and it has left a permanent mark. The flappers of the 1920s have left a permanent mark on our culture. They have expanded our perceptual envelope. They have given us permissions that were never granted to us before, for sexual freedom and things of that sort. So this stuff that I'm dealing with, music, seems trivial and peripheral and temporary. It is not. It expresses the very soul of subcultures.
Beautiful.
And those cultures expand the map of human possibility. They expand the map of human perception. And if we don't understand this in science, then science is blind, Javier. And
Yeah.
my science has to have open eyes, must never be blind.
Wow, that's just stunning. I mean, so powerful. I mean, I think that something amazing and beautiful that all the audience and myself and we all can get from this is that, this doing the things as if it was the very first time with total commitment and energy. Not only I always felt it in Michael Jackson, but when you, Howard, when you speak, it's unbelievable. It's mesmerizing because it's like you are completely on it, like as well with full commitment, and it really captures me, and I think it captures everybody. Is amazing, the feeling. Yeah.
Well, that's how I've lived my life, and I've been very lucky. When I was a kid, when I was 16 years old, I ran across two poems that became anthems for my life. One was Renaissance by Edna St. Vincent Millay, and it basically said you have to experience every form of suffering on the earth so that you can see the infinite in the tiniest of things.
So you have to experience the suffering.
Yes, except I expanded that to mean you have to experience every extreme of the human experience, including joy.
Yeah,
joy
all
is
extremes.
very often left out, and joy is extraordinarily important. So you have to experience the full range of human emotions to see the infinite in the tiniest of things. And the second poem was the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot, which said, if you have something heroic to do that you think will define you, that you think will bring young nubile girls crawling to your feet, you must start it now. If you put it off until tomorrow or until next week, you will never get to it. And by the time you do get to it, you will realize that you've run out of the life energy to ever achieve it. And you will realize that you have never given yourself the chance to become what you always felt was most essentially you. So it says, do it now. And buried in the middle of the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock are references to His Coy Mistress by Andrew Marvell. And To His Coy Mistress says, let us take all our strength and all our sweetness and roll it up in one bowl, in one ball, and roll it with rough strife through the iron gates of life. Thus, though we cannot make our son stand still, yet we will make him run. In other words, the lifetime allotted to us is short. Life is eternal experience. It ends in death. It's a terminal disease. And if you want to say fuck you to death, live 7 lives in one. And that's what I have been doing.
Live 7 lives in one. That's amazing. That's what you've been doing. That is extraordinary. Right. I mean, I love it that, through Howard's incredible book and this amazing conversation, we've been touching on all these universal principles and themes that touch every single human being. And this that you said, if you feel that, you got to do it now. You got to do things today, because if not, it will just be too late. And you expressed it, wow, so beautifully. Howard, I'm speechless. I mean, really, well, I guess we'll have to go because, I cannot take more of your time. But, I imagine that if we just began with your scientific career, we could be here for 20 hours. So I just want to...
Well, my latest peer-reviewed article, did I tell you this earlier in the conversation, came out on Saturday. It's an article
what is the article? Where can people find the article?
Go to Elsevier, and it'll only give you an abstract. They'll try to charge you for the article, unfortunately. At least it'll give you an abstract. So, yes, the science work is very important. But, Javier, you give me energy. I thank you very much for all that you've given to me in this conversation.
Well, I thank you for exactly the same thing. You've given me a lot of energy yourself, because you have such a commitment, such an energy, such a focus, It's extraordinary. So I want to invite to everybody, to get Howard's book, Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me, A Search for Soul in the Power Pits of Rock and Roll. Incredible book that goes way beyond the actual stories. It goes into universal principles that touch every single human being. Howard, such an honor. Thank you so very much.
Javier, it was a sheer pleasure.
Thank you for following the Beyond podcast. If you enjoy it, subscribe on YouTube and support it in other channels like Patreon and others. And hope to see you soon at the Beyond podcast. Thank you.